everyone, it's Heather Wells with Brain Balance here. I am by myself today. Jen and her family are enjoying spring break. So today we were doing Ask Us Anything, and questions have already started rolling in. But if anybody's watching and has some questions you want to type into the comments, we will answer as many as we can get to today. So Bess already has some ready, I think, to go. And so, all right, the first question. I know my child has struggles and my spouse always says I had the same issues growing up and I turned out fine. We just need to discipline him more. How do I help him see that our teen's issues are real and that he needs help? Wow, okay. I hear this question a lot. And one thing I'll say is on last week's show, I did an entire episode about when spouses aren't on the same page about parenting or about struggles. And so I give a lot of cues there. But one thing to keep in mind, let's talk about ADHD, for example. It didn't have a name when a lot of parents today were growing up. And even when it did, it wasn't as well known as it is now. And so we know more. And so one thing I say when parents say that to me is I'm so sorry you had those struggles growing up. What was that like for you? And helping your spouse understand that it's not just about, can my child do X, Y, Z, yes or no? How hard are they churning to do it? Are they having to work this hard or this hard? Because quality of life also matters. There's more to it than grades. There's more to it than can he do it. And no amount of punishment or discipline causes brain development to happen in the areas that are the cause of those struggles in the first place. We can do better for our son than what you had to endure growing up. You know, do you want him to thrive or just get by? Those are kind of some talking points in addition, I guess, to the show I shared last week. But yeah, back when I was growing up, a lot of individuals who had some of these struggles were called the problem kids, lazy, unmotivated, because their struggle was missed. We know better now, and we can do better for our kids. All right, next question. My teen won't apply himself in anything except sports. How do I get him motivated and in the task avoidance and battles about homework and chores? His answer to everything is I forgot. But I know he has a great memory because he can remember things we did years ago. All right, there's several components to this one. One is we all are going to be just naturally more motivated by things that we find intrinsically interesting, that are novel. That is even more true with some of our kids with neurodevelopmental struggles. And if you think about it, we tend to be drawn to things that are sort of in our wheelhouse. They come more naturally for us. So I have this much capacity to give. I'm doing things that are easy for me. I'm not having to work very hard. The needle doesn't move very quickly on those things. If I'm doing things that are harder or that I don't find interesting, if I don't find them interesting, I can't control the fact that I don't have dopamine and reward chemicals lighting up that help me maintain that focus. Plus, I'm doing things that make me work this hard. I run out of space to focus much more quickly than if I'm doing things that aren't really moving the needle. So that's part of it. Another thing about memory is there are many types of memory. If you're talking about something your child or teen remembers from years ago, I remember when we went to this park, this restaurant, and we did this, that, and the other thing because it was this holiday or it was Mother's Day or Dad's birthday. That is episodic memory, the ability to recall details and put them in context. We have spatial memory. A lot of our kids who struggle with schoolwork or chores have issues. They don't know where they are in space, so they have more difficulty using their planner or following directions that involve going to different rooms to complete the task. Or if there are directions about put things between this, over this, under this, beside, any directional words. If I don't know where I am in space, my brain has to work harder to process that. And so memory may not be as good on that. In our assessments, we even look specifically at spatial short-term memory and often find deficits there. Visual spatial skills, thinking with your eyes and remembering where things are in space. If you have kids who have trouble finding things or remembering where things go, that is a completely different type of memory. I've done memory shows in the past if you want to kind of search it in our videos. But one thing as far as getting them motivated and helping them find intrinsic motivation, it comes from within, not just because I have to avoid a punishment or to get a reward or you need somebody staying on top of a kid to do something, is to connect what they're learning to things they care about. So for example, if it's math, when am I ever going to use math? I mean, why do I need geometry? Why do I need algebra? Point out things in real life in which they're using those skills and they're not making that connection. For example, depending on the age, just regular math operations. If they are trying to save up allowance to buy something they really care about, talk about how that's math. Have them calculate the distance to a destination if you're going on a trip for spring break or some other time. And we have this budget. How are we going to divvy it up? We got to stay in budget, but we want to do fun things. So get them using those skills in areas that are fun, that they care about. If you're studying history, connect it to a camping trip. And how do you think that compares? We didn't have electricity. We didn't have running water. How do you think that compares to what was going on in this period of history? But anytime we connect it to background knowledge, connect it to interests, hobbies, their strengths, then you're going to have natural dopamine releases that help them keep going. All right, what's the next question? My friends tell me not to worry about my tween's behavior because he'll grow out of it. How do I know whether this is a real issue or me being overly sensitive to his difficulties? If I had a nickel for every time I've had parents come in really distraught saying, I have known something was going on for years and I wish I'd listened to my gut. We have this natural instinct to want to make people we care about feel better. And so sometimes that's where the he'll grow out of it comes from. A lot of things get attributed to boys being boys or that kind of thing. Or you know how girls are, they're so emotional. Some of these stereotypes still exist. But what research shows us over and over is that the vast majority of time, kids do not just grow out of it. In fact, the developmental, if they have this much gap right now, as time goes on without addressing it, the expectations keep rising and the gap between where they are and where they need to be will broaden. In my experience, 99.99% of the time, when your gut tells you something is not right, then parental instinct is usually right. And I would stick to your guns on that. All right, let's move on. My kids can pay attention for hours to video games and other things that they like, but are super distracted during homework time. It's so frustrating. How do I improve their attention for schoolwork? And does this mean they have ADHD? Okay. I think this question goes back to some of what I said on a previous question about when we're doing things that are in our wheelhouse, we have to think about how hard it is for kids and not just whether they can do it or not. So video games also have, it's actually short bursts of attention that are strung together so they can play a video game for hours. There's also a lot of artificial reinforcers. How many points did you get? Going to the next level, balloons and pop, 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 pop. There's so many things that get dopamine going, and then kids start relying on these extrinsic kind of superficial reinforcers to keep them going, and you don't get that in school. Nobody throws you a parade because you attended during the whole class. So it's important to know these are different kinds of attention. Also, is it in their wheelhouse or not? How hard is their brain working? The harder I'm working, the longer I can sustain focus. I'm going to run out of fuel on that. I don't remember the second part of that question, Bess. Oh, does it mean they have ADHD? There are many, many different sources of issues with attention and distractibility. One is attention and distractibility aren't the same thing. If your child has good attention, except when there are distractors, that may or may not be ADHD. It can be sensory processing challenges. We're supposed to have a natural filtering system and know what is relevant and what is irrelevant to attend to at a given time. So if they struggle there, it also requires self-regulation. I'm supposed to be doing this, shiny object, something way more enticing is over here. Self-regulation says, nope, I'm going to ignore those distractions and hone in on what I'm supposed to do. So if self-regulation is lower, if you have kids who are prone to impulsivity or emotional dysregulation, or you find them rushing through assignments, they interrupt others, engage in risky behaviors. These are examples of self-regulation issues. It's going to be harder to ignore distractions. But it can be many things. We have some kids who are distracted by visual input. They're not filtering out visual. Auditory processing issues can often mask as ADHD. Do they have difficulty attending in all scenarios, or is it specifically with auditory input? Think about how well they follow directions in background noise or without. That may be sensory or auditory processing types of things going on. There are primitive reflexes, like some of our kids have the startle reflex. It's like bright light, loud sound. What's going on? They're kind of on high alert. Their fight or flight system can get going and they can't resist that distraction. So equilibrium is super tied to decreased concentration. And that is one of the tricky sensory processing pieces that gets missed, I would say most frequently, because when people hear equilibrium, they think, well, my child's very athletic. They're not falling over on their face. Equilibrium is really about having your internal sense of being upright and balanced. Some of our kids feel discombobulated internally, so they don't feel grounded. They may have anxiety that decreases their concentration. Any of these can be co-occurring. ADHD has many comorbid conditions: anxiety, depression, sensory processing struggles, etc. So just because your child has a diagnosis of one thing does not mean that's the whole story. There could be a combination. It may not even be just two things. There could be 3 or 4 things going on that are combining. And then it's also important to think about the fact that there are different types of attention. Most people first think of attention span or sustained attention, but we have specific auditory, visual attention. There is switching attention or alternating attention. For example, if somebody drops a book and it's loud, or you're at a restaurant and somebody breaks some dishes, human nature is that we look over to see what happened. But cognitive flexibility allows me to immediately get right back on track to what I'm supposed to be doing. So if you have kids who have trouble switching gears, difficulty with transitions, I'm right, you're wrong, sort of rigid thinking, they may have difficulty with alternating attention, and by growing flexibility, that can improve. All right, what's next? Why did my child do so well in school in the early grades and then start struggling so much in the 3rd grade? Is she just not trying? This is a great question. That so often when kids had just sailed through the early grades and then they start struggling, it can seem like, well, they cared about it earlier. Now they just have a bad attitude about it. I hear this a lot. Think about in the early grades, we are learning a lot of building blocks. We're learning addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. This sound goes with this letter. These are your phonics rules. And what happens is each year builds on the ones before it. So one, if kids have difficulty with memorization, they don't have a solid foundation. So their brain has to work hard to retrieve information that's supposed to be automatic. And now I have less to give as the grades go on. It's not enough to know those facts any longer. Now I have to see how the big picture and how to apply and generalize the knowledge. We have to do more complex things. We start out with addition, subtraction. Later on, those same calculations are found in algebraic formulas and solve for X. So big picture. Also, in the early grades, we are learning to read. In mid-2nd grade to 3rd grade, there's a big shift to reading to learn. The better the fluency is, the more brain space, brain power I have left to think about what it is I'm reading. And we're not just expected to tell the story, who did it, what happened, all these literal, logical, concrete things. Now we're supposed to read between the lines and infer information. What was the author's purpose? We have to get the gist and the relevant details. So expectations go up. Those can be very different parts of the brain being called upon. But do they know how to apply and generalize knowledge? How automated are the pieces that they learned in the early grades? The more they have to work to retrieve that information, the less brain space they have to do more complex things with it. All right, let's move on. My daughter plays 3 sports and does okay with it, but has inconsistent skills. For example, she can throw a ball well, but isn't great at hitting a softball. I can't put my finger on why, just like I can't figure out why she is underperforming in school, even though she makes A's and B's. Something seems a little bit off, but she's so smart and talented. Are these things related, and should I be worried? I love this question so much, because what we're talking about, it's not just about an individual of any age. It doesn't have to have profound, severe deficits for it to impact quality of life. You're picking up on something subtle. How old is she? Knowing that expectations and complexity of what we must do continue to get harder. Catching things early is a really good idea. As far as are those related, very likely, yes. There are research studies in the hundreds that show us the link between motor skills and learning. Jensen, he was an educator who wrote a really fantastic book, and he talked about how movement should be just as important as so-called book work. When we are engaged in movement, we are growing the same brain pathways that we require for reading and math in any school subject. When we are using both sides of our bodies in complementary but opposing actions, we are building pathways between the left and the right hemisphere, so we have details and big picture. We have regulation, we have memorization, we have all the skills working together, we have flexible thinking. And it also gets the front and the back of the brain going. When we're engaged in motor activities, our cerebellum is firing sending lots of messages to our prefrontal cortex to focus, process, learn, read, write, spell, do math, problem solve. There's a huge link between ADHD and learning differences and developmental coordination disorder. Or dyspraxia, like motor planning issues. I learned to plan in my motor system, and then I learned to plan a project. I get rhythm and timing in my body. It helps me grow time management. I don't have time blindness, which is often associated with attentional issues, and those with or without a diagnosis of ADHD. So yes, those things are related. And when you think about the skills that, for example, in sports that your daughter, you said she has trouble hitting a softball. That is an object coming closer to me. That requires a visual perception skill called convergence. That is the same skill that helps me look to the front of the classroom, to the chalkboard, gather the information, and correctly put it in my planner. I get the due date, what pages I'm supposed to read, and all that kind of information. So there are many overlaps there. And if something small is wrong now, just know that the expectations go up. And catching it early, it might not be too hard to catch her up. But if you do it later, the gap is likely to widen. Okay, what else? Once my daughter makes up her mind about something, there is no changing it. She is defiant and emotional, especially at home. She has friends right now, but I'm concerned she will start losing them if she continues this behavior. How do I help her with self-regulation? Excellent. When we think about higher level thinking skills, we have 3 top tier skills from which other executive functions come. We're talking about like the CEO of the brain, the getting stuff done in life skills. Most of the time people think of time management, organization, prioritizing, task initiation, those types of things as executive functions, and they are. But one of the top ones is self-regulation. Under that, we have impulse control, emotional regulation. As far as the emotions, there are several components of this. One is that we have to be able to have big picture skills. And for example, I am really worked up about something. It did not go the way I want it to. And I get this telescopic view of this, and I'm really mad or frustrated about it. If I could step back and put on my wide angle lens, I can think about this from different vantage points. And I can start realizing that in the big scheme of things, you know what? I was acting like that was an 8 and it's a 2. By the way, we don't want to tell our kids it's no big deal. We want to empathize with them and then help them. What's another way of thinking about this? We don't want to tell them it's no big deal. It's very important to empathize, but they learn this ability by working on big picture skills. Another thing that we need is emotional granularity. Those of us involved in the show right now know that we can be happy, sad, mad, uncertain, name any emotion, and all of those occur on a broad spectrum. Mad doesn't mean infuriated. Uncertain doesn't mean terrified. Sad doesn't mean devastated. When kids have less brain connectivity, fewer kind of communication pathways in emotional processing, they tend to see things much more black and white. Everything's great, everything's horrible. He just flipped a switch. And so one really good thing to do is to, if they say, I'm so mad about this, and they're acting infuriated, you say, yeah, I'm so sorry you're mad right now. It's hard when XYZ happens, whatever's relevant to the situation. You know what? One time I thought I was mad, and then I realized when I thought about it, I'm not really mad. I'm just kind of disappointed. I didn't think my friend would treat me like that. Do you think that's what you're feeling, or do you think it's really mad? You're not telling them what they're feeling. You're giving them perspective and something else to consider. Label multiple words for similar emotions: disappointed, frustrated, annoyed. And what happens, what research consistently shows us, is that when kids grow a cognitive framework for the broad spectrum of emotions and the shades and degrees of them that can happen, they don't just learn to cope with them, they actually start experiencing the emotion more in keeping with what really happened, and therefore appropriate behaviors follow. They're like, wait a second, that's what I'm feeling. I'm just a little frustrated. I'm not mad. Once they know that's possible, that puts it in perspective, and they have somewhere to go from there. It's also really good through stories. When you read books, do what's called dialogic reading. You hear the word dialogue in there. Not just reading the story, but how do you think the character felt right there? And let the child answer. You don't correct. Maybe you provide alternatives that are less severe than the emotion that your son or daughter names. And talk about the problem, the resolution. What do you think about how they handled it? Would you do anything differently? Why or why not? And you're really growing social emotional skills, and you can really teach them so much more in those moments, because you're not trying to engage them when their emotions are up to here. You're talking to their logical brain. When kids are very heightened emotionally, the guard dog of our brain, the amygdala, just hijacks information that you're trying to teach them, and it doesn't penetrate different parts of the brain, the hippocampus for language and memory, the prefrontal cortex where we have regulation. Good ways to work on impulse control is to play red light, green light, play Simon Says. They have to wait to hear if Simon says it before they do the action. Different games where there's a lot of start, go. If you're playing with cars, going different speeds, and then, you have the green car just going way too fast. The red car maybe barely moving, and the yellow car going a medium speed even before homework time. Is your brain in red car, green car, or yellow card mode? Those are some kind of concrete ways to get that kind of more firmly planted. But as far as the defiance, what's another way of thinking about this? How do you think your sister sees it the same way? Really kind of role-playing scenarios, helping them see how you feel in a situation, how their sister feels, how they feel. That we never want to punish the emotion. We want to help grow their theory of mind, their ability to put themselves into somebody else's shoes. Bring up questions around the dinner table where it's not all fact, fact, fact. What is your opinion on this? What is your opinion? And help, we all have different opinions, and it doesn't mean any of us is right or wrong. We can disagree, and maybe there is no right, maybe there is no wrong, because this is an opinion. A lot of students who sort of are defiant or have inflexible thinking think everything's right or wrong, black or white, and you start really filling in those shades and degrees. And you can do that through stories also. What else? I used to have such a great relationship with my kids. Now that they're older, they shut me out. How do I reestablish our connection? That's so hard. Okay, several things to this. One thing that is not fun for parents, but it's also part of healthy development, is that as kids become teens, friendships take on a bigger role, and their opinions sometimes do matter more than parents on the surface. But know that your relationship is always the foundation. It is always the rock, and it does matter. One thing is to make sure that you just incorporate open-ended questions throughout every day, even when there's nothing going wrong. And you want to ask open-ended questions, but also targeted. Sometimes if we ask kids, how was your day? That is such a monstrous question. I don't even know how to narrow down an answer. You're very likely to get answers like, I don't know, fine, whatever. It's okay. Great. I just feel really connected now. But maybe say, tell me something funny that happened today. What was your favorite part of the day? What was the toughest part? How did that test go? A lot of it has to do with the tone of voice. There's non-threatening. When you make a practice of asking non-threatening questions, and you're always engaged and interested in you're interested in their interests. Wow, I love, you're so good at that game. Will you teach me how to play? You're showing interest in their interests, giving them opportunities to cultivate their strengths. When nothing's wrong, you want to talk. That makes it feel less threatening when there is something that really is heavy that you need to talk about. It doesn't feel like a curveball, like, wow, okay, my guard's going up because now I'm feeling threatened. No, we have this engagement all the time, and this is counterintuitive. Sometimes kids will open up better when you're in the car, for example, because you can't have eye contact because eyes on the road. There's just something that's less threatening. I'm not saying eye contact isn't important. I'm talking about when they shut you out. Sometimes they will open up a little bit more during those times than they will when you also want to make it kind of light instead of, we need to talk. Chill, go out and play catch, get out on the swing, grab some popcorn, a favorite snack, and make it fun. Make it sort of, and make it just a daily. There's one-on-one connection time, not just family time is very important, but so is one-on-one time. Father, daughter, mother, son, all the combinations there. Okay, what else? Oh, and one other thing I'll say is to not invalidate emotions. Whatever they're feeling is how they're feeling it. We think we're being helpful, and we're like, oh, that's no big deal. Get over it. It's going to be okay. They don't feel okay right now. When they feel heard, listen until they feel understood, not just until you understand. And that takes longer. I've been hearing this term, executive functions. What does that really mean? Okay. Executive functions are at the airport. That is air traffic control. It is the CEO of our brain. It is the part of our brain that organized tasks, breaks them down, knows where to prioritize. It's attention, it's memory, it's higher level thinking skills. It's metacognition, being able to think about your thinking, realize maybe a bias you're coming in with on something. But it really has to do, the top tier skills are working memory, cognitive flexibility, and impulse control. I've talked about impulse control already some. I've talked about in regulation, cognitive flexibility we've touched on. Working memory is like a mental sketch pad. It is fleeting information that we load up onto our mental sketch pad to solve a task or a problem, and then we wipe it clean and move on to the next. For example, if you need to make a call to the doctor's office, you have questions for the doctor, you need to consider your kid's schedule, your schedule, you maybe have a prescription you're getting refilled, you for allergies or something, you've loaded up your sketch pad with everything, so you're sure you get your questions answered and get that appointment scheduled, get that med refilled. You load it up, you take care of that call, you get it scheduled, you get the med called in, wipe it clean, reload with the next thing. So a lot of even experts in attention research say that a lot of attentional issues, they are based in issues with regulation, issues with working memory. But it is the CEO of our brain. Really the simplest way I can say it is the getting stuff done in life skills. Being able to think with your eyes and use a planner, and just think about all the skills you use as a parent or on your job, being organized, managing your time, prioritizing, paying attention, remembering the pertinent things, regulating yourself, controlling impulses. That's what executive functions are in the simplest terms. Anything else? My son reverses letters and is a horrible speller. My daughter is the opposite. She sounds great when she reads, but her comprehension is poor. How can I help? Okay. One question I get a lot about reversing letters is, does this mean my son has dyslexia? And the answer is no, it does not. It can be associated with dyslexia, but it is not a dead giveaway. We have a lot of visual perception skills that have some of the exact same symptoms as dyslexia. Dyslexia is a language and auditory processing based struggle. So let's say a child is trying to spell the word desk and they spell it D-E-K-S. When that happens, it's because we have 7 auditory pathways that communicate between the 2 hemispheres. They all deliver different parts of that acoustic signal. And that means the K arrived before the S in the brain. So there was sort of a malfunction there. And so therefore, that's how they spell it. We have eye tracking, that's part of visual perception, that is unrelated to dyslexia, although a child can have both, where their eyes are supposed to track like this across the page and their eyes are jumping around. A child with issues with visual perception may spell desk instead of desk because they saw the K before the S. That's what I did as a little girl, and it will definitely impact spelling. I knew rules like I before E except after C, but then my I would see the E before the I, so then that's how I spelled it. So it's very important to have really thorough testing to see are the issues coming from language, auditory processing, visual perception. Visual perception gets overlooked much, much more than auditory processing struggles. But yes, the fluency of reading is very, very predictive of reading comprehension once that gets harder, because I'm using, like, the act of reading is very automated, and now my whole brain is free to concentrate on what I'm reading and to remember it and to understand it. If a lot of times when kids have difficulty with reading comprehension, and they may have even done fine in the early grades, it's not enough to know what it says in black and white print. You have to read between the lines and infer information and understand the author's purpose. Some kids don't even know this was meant to be funny. This is an opinion, not a fact piece. So one good thing to do to help with comprehension is, before you even open a book, to look at the cover and have them make guesses about what it's about. Help them understand what inferencing is through guessing. What do you think this book is about based on the cover? Why do you think that? What questions do you have? You just kind of generate curiosity, because a curious mind is going to attend better. I generated the questions and I'm in search of the answers. And then afterwards, go through and see how many guesses were accurate and not. It's not threatening because they're not wrong. They were a guess. Another really good thing is to look at morphology, the parts of words. Vocabulary expectations continue to go through the roof in every grade. In 5th grade, kids are exposed to an average of over 10,000 new words, and yet the average fifth grader only learns 8 to 10 new words a week. There's a disconnect there. And a lot of kids lack the regulation. Impulse control can get in the way of comprehension. I have to have really metacognition. I'm aware of my thinking. I have self-awareness. I'm aware of when my comprehension breaks down. I can hit the brake pedal and go back and reread it. I can think about how it applies to the previous sentence, the previous paragraph, the previous chapter. If there's unfamiliar vocabulary, it's really good to review those before you read with your kids. But in school, maybe you don't have that opportunity. Teach them to look up words. That sounds so obvious, but kids with regulation issues may not think to do that. But morphology means really working on teaching kids prefixes, suffixes, and root words, because when you do that, you exponentially improve their vocabulary. Re means to do again, that kind of thing. Un means the opposite of. When they know that and they start recognizing root words, suddenly they understand longer words that would have been overwhelming to them at first. But do they have big picture skills? Are they literal? If you have kids who are super literal, you say we were going to do this at 5 o'clock, it's 5:07. They may have difficulty with figurative language, more abstract language. We even have kids who, because of sensory processing struggles, might understand nouns and verbs. They have trouble with descriptive words. Their tactile aversion means that crunchy, rough, smooth, silky don't mean as much to them. So it depends on what the issue is, how to take care of it. Do they have eye tracking issues? Because maybe the comprehension would be fine if their whole brain fuel wasn't taken up with going back to compensate for what they skipped over. And kids can do that so quickly that the reading sounds fluent, but it eats up their brain fuel. So an assessment's really the best way to go on that. Final question. Both my kids are horrible test takers. How can I help them reveal what they know in exams? Yes, for so many reasons. I know why schools do standardized assessments, and of course there are assessments throughout the school year. We're not usually getting dopamine going when you teach to the test, and I know it has to do with school funding. I know all that, but we need to make learning engaging, number one. Number two, one of the biggest things I see on issues with tests are a lot of times kids rehearse the material, you study with them, you think, man, they have this down pat. And then you get the test back and it's like, wow, they kind of bombed it. A lot of times kids who struggle with big picture skills know the information, but on a test, it's asked slightly differently. And because they can't see the context, sometimes can't see the forest for the trees, they may not recognize that that is the same information they studied, just presented a little bit differently. And so consider that. Another thing is, do they need accommodations for attention? Could a little board around them help, or little earplugs to tune out distractions? That could be sensory processing or distractibility. A lot of kids have test anxiety. And that can come from a lot of sources. They may have generalized anxiety that also translates to tests, or it may be specific test anxiety. Sometimes that comes from kids who lack a sense of time. They sort of have time blindness. If you have kids who are always making you run late, they turn in assignments late, if at all, think about time blindness. I don't have an internal clock. I know I have 45 minutes to take this test, but I don't know what 45 minutes feels like. So I rush through because I want to make sure I finish. I don't know how to pace myself. Timers can help, but sometimes for kids with anxiety, that timer makes them more anxious. So you have to play around. Another good thing to do for high stakes tests is to simulate the environment at home and give mock tests. I know that's not fun, but they get used to that to where the whole testing environment doesn't feel as foreign to them. Sometimes the unexpected things that are different can cause anxiety. So just simulating that and doing practice tests. Make sure when they're studying, they don't just study in order. In other words, this chapter is about addition, the next chapter is about subtraction. I'm using simplistic terms for this. Sometimes kids with cognitive inflexibility have trouble switching gears because a test doesn't necessarily ask questions in the order they came in the book. So ask questions out of order to make sure they really know it, and not that it's just rote memorization. When it's asked differently, they may not recognize it. So many things go in there. Is it visual perception? Which one of these does not describe an amoeba? In biology class, their eye skips over the word not, and they read which one of these describes an amoeba. A does, on to the next. On math tests, eyes can skip around and they inadvertently calculate the wrong digits, and it can look like they just didn't care or they're careless. If they have fine motor struggles, if they put too much effort into the act of writing, that uses up their brain fuel, and now I have less brain space to think about these super smart thoughts I have in my brain to put down onto paper. So kind of log it, look for, is it in all classes, is it in certain classes, so that you can sort of narrow down what is causing the issue. So I saw a final question, so I guess that's all. I appreciate everyone who kind of gave us some questions in advance, and if you had any that didn't get typed in time, we can do another show like this soon. But if you have any questions about our program or questions about today's show or questions that didn't get answered, feel free to message us on whichever page you're watching this show on. I so appreciate you sharing your time with us. Hope you and your family have a wonderful spring break, and we'll see you next week at the same time, 11 o'clock Central. Have a great week.